Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. Hi all, Dr. Clark here again, and for this lecture we're going to talk and continue talking about energy. Last time we left off, we were talking about matter and energy, and I kind of laid the groundwork for talking about energy. With energy can be photons, energy can be electrons, energy can be ATP. Well, we're going to kind of dive into the photon part, the part that allows for plants to capture this energy and convert it into chemical energy or stored energy. That's what we're going to go with from this energy perspective. We're also going to talk a little bit about properties of energy, so you kind of know how energy works and how we classify different properties of energy. Okay, first off, let's just assume, maybe I have a pen and I have the tip of a pen and I'm standing there where photons can strike the tip of this pen, and, that tip of the pen, the number of photons that are hitting the very tip of that pen is over 1,000 billion photons per second. So photons or light energy or light particles are extremely important, also extremely abundant. Okay, so having something that can capture those particles, having a process to capture those particles and convert it into stored energy is huge. Okay, and when we start talking and we go back to start talking about maybe solar energy and the process by which solar panels or solar photovoltaic rays work. Okay, we have to think about photosynthesis. That's why we're covering photosynthesis, is because our technology for solar panels came from photosynthesis. The ideas of capturing photons came from what plants do every day. Even Thomas Edison, a very long time ago, realized the potential that solar has and the pitfalls of getting a society to convert their technology, to update their technology, to utilize the sun versus a finite amount of material, say fossil fuels, is going to be difficult. Okay, so Thomas Edison wrote, "I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." He was already discussing issues that are occurring currently today. Whether we should make that switch, whether we should forego digging and drilling in the system and start building infrastructure to capture photons of light. Should we do it now while we still have oil and coal on the planet? Or should we wait, like Thomas Edison is saying, should we wait until we run out and then tackle the idea when we run out or when we get much closer to running out? We'll come back to this. I just want to, spur a little bit of discussion, with you from a standpoint of, look, you guys, you're the students, you're the next generation that is going to have to make these decisions. All right, so let's jump in to energy. Okay. So again, we're building up to the process of photosynthesis. I'm going to describe photosynthesis in a much greater detail as we progress. Okay? But first, we need to talk about how energy or how we classify energy. We classify energy in two main ways. We classify energy as potential energy. Okay, this is known as stored energy, and it can come in many different forms. So you could have stored energy like this picture, the water behind a dam. That is stored energy. Okay? But we could also say, hey, look, this bottle of sparkling ice, okay, this bottle right here has potential energy. You can read on the back. It says it has 5 calories in that bottle. Okay? That is still stored energy. Okay? We could have a candy bar. Look at the back and it says how many calories are in it. That's stored energy or potential energy. We could talk about, a rock on the top of a hill that is, all it needs is just a little push, but that still has potential energy. Okay? And that's what I want to try to get across, that a lot of potential energy, a lot of the stored energy that we have in the world, you have to apply some energy in order to get energy in return. Okay? So that rock on top of the hill, you have to supply a little energy to push that rock, to move that rock. And once you do, then kinetic energy takes place. Okay? Kinetic energy is the energy of motion or energy in motion. So potential energy is the water behind the dam. We open the gates, the water's flowing out of the dam. That's kinetic energy. And it's important to know the differences between the two. Most of what we're going to be talking about in this class is potential energy. We're going to talk about energy that is stored. How do plants convert photons into glucose, fructose, sucrose, starches, cellulose, all these other molecules? How do they do it? Okay. Well, all those molecules, glucose, fructose, etc., that's all potential energy. Okay. Where's the kinetic energy? Well, the kinetic energy comes in the part of photons, which are moving energy. And they're moving energy, and they hit what we call the antenna complex. The antenna complex causes resonant energy, which is energy that's moving from one spot to another. So still kinetic energy. That energy then excites electrons, which move to an electron transport chain. Still movement. Okay, kinetic energy. Eventually, that energy gets bound up. Those electrons get captured, recaptured, okay? And they form ATP, and that ATP is then potential energy. It's potential to drive work. Okay? We can look at it in another way like this. Okay? Here you can see this individual's riding his bike up the hill. Energy has to be put in to get to the top of the hill. When you get to the top of the hill, there's a point where potential energy takes over, and it's no longer kinetic energy. It's potential energy. Then that release point, then it becomes kinetic energy again. So regardless of whether the energy is going into the system and you're having to supply the energy, or the energy is coming out of the system, it's still kinetic if the energy is in motion. If the energy is stable, it's bound, it's not moving, then we call it potential energy. All right, so let's look at the electromagnetic spectrum, or what often is called the electromagnetic radiation. Radiation meaning the movement of particles. How does it radiate through the atmosphere? Okay, and so this is what we know right now as the electromagnetic spectrum. It ranges from radio waves all the way to gamma rays, and the size of these waves really vary drastically. Radio waves are very large waves, so large that they can be, building size. That's their pattern through the environment is, huge waves, all the way to gamma rays, which are the size of the nucleus of an atom. Minute, very, very small, hard to detect at times. Okay. Now, the ones that we're most interested in, I'll definitely come back to it, is this range here: infrared, visible, and ultraviolet. Because these are the wavelengths that are directly associated, or can be directly associated, with life on the planet. That doesn't mean that microwaves aren't important, radio waves aren't important, X-rays aren't important, gamma rays aren't important. But these ones are the ones that drive life processes for the most part. Okay? All right, so let's look at an example of where you can get two types of waves interacting or working in the same kind of unit. So again, we're talking about this electromagnetic spectrum, but we're picking out wavelengths and we're utilizing the properties of wavelengths, of these different wavelengths, in different ways. Okay? So most of you know how a microwave works. At least you know that you put your food in, you close the door, you push a button, it heats your food, you eat your food, all is good. Now we're going to dive into how a microwave looks just a little more in detail. Not too much. I don't want to bore you with all the details. But a microwave makes microwaves. Right? That part of the electromagnetic spectrum, the microwave part, can be recreated in this box by using a magnetron and some other transformers and capacitors and things like that. Okay, but we can recreate those wave patterns inside this box. Well, it just happens to be that microwaves are not, it's not something that you want to be blasting yourself with constantly. So the door of the microwave is highly important. And you'll notice that all microwaves will have kind of some type of metal mesh on the front part of the door. That door prevents the microwaves, that wave pattern, from exiting the little box that you call a microwave. But you'll also notice that that door is often got a window. Okay? Now you will see that there's metal in that window, okay? But that window also allows for another type of electromagnetic spectrum or another type of wavelength to penetrate and move out. Okay? And that would be, what's not shown here, that would be visible light. So often your microwave, I'd say nearly 100% of them, okay, not all the time are they working though, okay, but they will have a light on the inside that when the power is triggered, okay, the light comes on so you can see your food cook. So you know if you're burning your food or whatnot, but you can see your food cook. Well, the reason you can see your food cook is because visible light can leave through the window, can leave through this material, but microwaves, that wave pattern, can't. So you're protected, it won't harm you, okay? But you can visually see the food inside the microwave while the door's closed and it's cooking. Okay, so they're kind of working together through an engineering design that we designed, we being humans, designed to allow for microwaves to cook food, but at the same time allow for visible light to leave so you can see the food cook. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit about the planet. Okay, so when we talk about the electromagnetic spectrum, and we talk about from radio waves all the way to gamma rays, okay, we're talking about the spectrum that's known to us. Currently, right now, this is the spectrum that's known to us. This is the spectrum at which we know the sun sends out. Okay, the sun releases these waves in this spectrum. Could there be others outside of the spectrum? Maybe. Okay? We don't know. Right now we can't detect them if there is others. Okay? But right now we know this spectrum. Well, only a portion of that spectrum can reach the Earth's surface. And there are 3 that reach the Earth's surface. Those 3 are also the 3 that are important for life on our planet. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't have the capability of using radio waves and recreating radio waves and microwaves and gamma rays. We can recreate them on our planet. We know how to do that. Okay? But they're not coming into and hitting the Earth's surface. Instead, they're either recreated by machines and technology that we have, or we have to detect them from outside this planet. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a second. So we know the ultraviolet, we know the harm that ultraviolet can do, but we often don't talk about the benefits that ultraviolet might play on life on this earth. Okay? We know that if you are exposed to too much ultraviolet, that you can get sunburn, skin damage, okay, that it has the potential to cause cancer, cause mutations in your DNA. We know this. We utilize it all the time in making mutations and killing off organisms that might be harmful. We use UV radiation to do that. But what we don't understand yet, and we're just barely scratching the surface on it, is what role does UV play in other organisms? We know there are quite a few insects, birds, some fish that have the capability, or it seems like they have the capability, to see in UV. To see in ultraviolet. We know that insects have this capability. We know that some birds have this capability. Now, some of the other organisms, fish, amphibians, and things like that, we think they do. But it might be a little harder to detect in some of those situations. But at any rate, we know that they can see in ultraviolet. So they visualize things in our world that we can't detect without using technology. So when you're looking at a flower that might be purple and yellow, maybe to a bird, maybe to an insect, it's not purple and yellow. Maybe it's purple and yellow because they can see the visible light spectrum also, but maybe there's also an ultraviolet component to it. Maybe they can see lines that we can't see, that we don't detect. And we're just starting to understand the premise behind this. We think that ultraviolet might play a role in navigation, mate selection, even species recognition, that it could play a big role. So we'll come back and I'll show you some examples of this in the future. Okay. The visible light spectrum by far to us is the most important one because our eyes can detect the visible light spectrum. Okay. And, we know that from roughly 350 to 800, 820 nanometers, that's the visible light spectrum. That's the wavelengths that our eyes can detect. So those are typically, the part of the spectrum that we talk most about or utilize most in our lives. There's another part of the spectrum, the infrared part of the spectrum, okay, that other organisms have the capability of using. Okay? Some of you have probably heard of pit vipers. Rattlesnakes are pit vipers, an example of pit viper. They have little pits on their lip. Well, those pits are infrared pits. So those pits have sensories that pick up on the infrared wavelengths. So they can see heat. So they can detect heat. So when the visible light spectrum might be gone, or the ability for the visible light spectrum is gone. So let's say in very low light conditions, so your cones, which are what gives you color, in low light conditions, dark, okay, your cones don't work. Okay, your rods work so you can see kind of the outlines of images and things like that, depending on how much light's coming in. But your cones don't work. Your cones need a lot of light, a lot of that photons traveling in the visible light spectrum in order for you to see color. So this is why you can't see color at night very well at night. Okay, that infrared plays a really big role in organisms that hunt at night. Okay, so like rattlesnakes and things like that hunt at night. They see heat that's given off by an organism. They don't see color. They don't, they're not using the visible light spectrum. Instead, they're using the infrared light spectrum or infrared spectrum. Okay. So when we bring this up, again, we can detect on our planet rays that are coming in that are infrared, okay, in this range, that are optical in the visual range, that are ultraviolet, okay? And if we send satellites out of our atmosphere, we can detect X-ray. Okay? X-rays do not penetrate our atmosphere, neither do gamma, micro, or radio. Okay? They don't penetrate our planet. They don't hit the surface of the Earth. But we do have the capability of collecting data or capturing material that's coming at the range of X-ray by sending out telescopes, satellites, etc., with this detection capability on it. Okay, so we can actually see the X-rays, but not on our planet. And again, like I said, we obviously can generate these. Okay? We can generate radio waves, we can generate microwaves, we can generate X-rays and gamma rays on our planet using our technology, using something that will produce that wave pattern. We have that capability. It's just the sun, the waves that are being emitted from the sun that are in these wave patterns are not hitting the Earth's surface. Okay. All right, so let's dive into one that's more familiar to you, and that might be why we see color. Okay, so when we talk about wavelengths, we need to talk about why we see color. And this is important because this tells us a lot about different organisms, okay? Especially plants, which is why we're going to examine this, is because we're going to soon talk about photosynthesis directly. Okay, so why you see color is you see the wavelength that is not being absorbed by the material that you're looking at. So let's pull up the electromagnetic spectrum. Again, here it is. It's just in reverse order. Gamma rays over here, very, very small. Okay, radio waves over here, very, very large. Visible light spectrum here. Okay? So I said about 350, 360, 370, somewhere in that range is the end of the spectrum, okay, on the violet side. And then 800, 820, 850, somewhere out here, is the end of the spectrum, the visible light spectrum, okay, on the red side, okay, and those are measured in nanometers. Okay. So let's say you're looking out and you see a green tree, okay? Green tree. So somewhere in here, about 530, maybe 540 is the color of that tree. Okay? The reason why we see green is because photons are hitting that tree. That tree's branches or whatever part we're looking at is absorbing all these wave patterns. Okay? Probably even some infrared, probably some ultraviolet, okay, depends on the species of tree. It's absorbing all of them except for what we see. So at 540, that photon is being reflected back off the surface of that object into our eye, to our retina, and interacting with cones inside our retina. So again, your retina is built of rods and cones. Okay? Rods are made to basically see and detect light intensity. Okay? So the rods are very important for detecting how much light is there and adjusting for how much light is there to still make an image. So rods are actually really, really important at night for seeing at dusk, night, early morning, that kind of stuff. The cones are where you have your color absorptive material, or the reason why we see color. So that photon comes in at the wave pattern of 540, comes in, goes into the cone, interacts with the cone. The cone then sends a chemical message, okay? And it sends a unique chemical message depending on the wavelength at which it is receiving. So in this case, the wavelength that it's receiving is 540. Okay? It goes back, okay, it goes to the optical nerve, goes into the part of the brain that is going to register color or register what that image might be. Okay? And we see that as green. Okay? 540 being green. That's how your eyes work. Now, we are called a tricolor organism, which means inside our cones, we have 3 pigment absorbing material, okay, chemicals. And one that absorbs blue, one that absorbs yellow, and one that absorbs red. Okay? So blue, red, and yellow. From that, we can utilize just those 3 colors to make every single known color, every single known visible part of the light spectrum. Okay? And we can detect every one of these and utilize that to distinguish different colors. Other organisms might only have 2 capabilities. Maybe they only have 2 parts of the color spectrum. So maybe they only have blue and yellow, so they wouldn't be able to detect material out here. They wouldn't be able to detect any color maybe after 600 nanometers. Other organisms might have more capabilities. We don't know. Maybe they have material. We know that some organisms have capability of seeing ultraviolet. So they have a spectrum that goes further. Okay? So instead of stopping off at like 360, 370, okay, maybe it goes way further out. Okay? Maybe 200. Right? We don't know all the capabilities of these different organisms. But I just want to make sure that you understand, like other things in this class, just because we see this spectrum. We can see these wavelengths. Doesn't mean that all organisms see these wavelengths. It also doesn't mean that organisms can't see outside of these wavelengths. And that plays a really important role in how we design material. Okay? There's been lots of thoughts, and we'll get back to this. We'll come back to this. If birds can see ultraviolet rays, which there's pretty good evidence that they can. If they can pick up ultraviolet rays, then maybe we can use a paint to paint the wind turbine, paddles on a wind turbine. Okay? Maybe we can paint them ultraviolet. We won't be able to see it. Okay? But maybe we can paint them ultraviolet so when birds are navigating in low light situations, that's probably when they're going to be using their ultraviolet, that they would be able to detect the wind turbine. They can see it during the day. They're not hitting them in the day. It's in dusk and sometimes at night when they're, when they're navigating through nighttime, then birds will hit the turbine, their wings or paddles or whatever you call them. They will hit them, okay, and die from that collision. But if we can paint it ultraviolet, because the birds can see ultraviolet, then we can prevent those accidental collisions from happening as much. Okay? And for that matter, we could even paint buildings, because birds hit buildings way more than they hit wind turbines. But we could paint buildings that ultraviolet, or maybe we could put an ultraviolet sheen on our windows. Okay? If the birds can see this ultraviolet, we won't be able to detect it. It wouldn't change anything for us, okay? But it would prevent those accidental collisions in windows and things like that. So it's a possibility. There's a lot of ideas out there along that line. And then just knowing that other organisms can utilize infrared or ultraviolet can tell us a lot about other situations that we might want to deal with. So why do plants' leaves change color in the fall? Well, this is part of that photosynthesis. This is where we're going. Okay, photosynthesis are based around a complex called the antenna complex. So the antenna complex is a group of molecules, pigment absorption molecules, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. If we're talking about green plants, it's chlorophyll A and B, and then other pigment absorbing complexes. Okay, so they're pigment absorbing proteins that absorb certain wavelengths. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I say it's a pigment absorption molecule, or it's absorbing a certain wavelength. Right, so chlorophyll A and B, you can see what they absorb here. Okay, so they're absorbing violet and blue and even a little bit of light blue, and they're absorbing out here a little bit of yellow, orange, and red. Those are the chlorophyll molecules. That's one of the molecules in the antenna complex. There are other molecules in that antenna complex, some called carotenoids, some called xanthophylls, some called keratin, okay? And those absorb other pigments. So here you can see the carotenoids have that ability to absorb up some of that green visible light. Okay? The more of these molecules you have, the more of the visible light spectrum a plant can use. They can absorb those photons and utilize that energy to drive work and reconfigure chemicals into chemical stored energy. Now, the reason why leaves change their color is because chlorophyll molecules, which are the dominant molecules, you could see they don't absorb green. Chlorophyll molecules don't absorb green. That's why most plants are green. Most leaves are green, is because that color is not absorbed by chlorophyll. Okay? So as time progresses, as the day progresses, the weeks progress, into the fall, temperatures change, and the ability for chlorophyll to maintain its status as the most abundant absorption molecule goes away. So chlorophyll starts to deteriorate with changes in temperature. And sometimes it's not just changes in temperature. It can be changes in chemical composition in the soil, okay, or in the air that can drive some of these changes. But fall colors is mainly due to the change in the temperature, okay, that chlorophyll cannot withstand those temperatures anymore, so chlorophyll molecules go away. Well, what's in place of those chlorophyll molecules? Well, in this case, we're showing carotenoids. It also could be xanthophylls, keratins, okay, other things. But carotenoids are the ones that give you a lot of that orange and red color that we associate with fall colors. Carotenoids are absorbing greens and blues, okay, but they're reflecting oranges and reds. So chlorophyll goes away and your carotenoids are there, so then your color of the leaf changes. And what's being reflected is yellow, orange, red, okay, and because the molecules that are left in the leaf are carotenoids and not chlorophyll. Okay, we'll come back and we'll look at some more examples of these, the electromagnetic spectrum and its role in life in general.